Today we're going to be talking about emotions. Emotions are how we react to stimulus or how we feel about events in our lives or how we react to stress. And emotions also have to do with emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? Our textbook says that emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions and to be sensitive to others' feelings. This is a really important component of your personality. Your emotional intelligence is positively linked with your self-esteem, your life satisfaction, and professional advancement. Your IQ measures how smart you are, but your EQ, or your emotional intelligence, monitors how we react to others. You might wonder how this has an impact on our self-esteem. Well, imagine if you didn't understand how people reacted around you. Our textbook uses the example of the show The Big Bang Theory. If you're familiar with Sheldon Cooper, you know that he doesn't understand sarcasm. He doesn't understand the cliched terms that people around him use, and it leaves him feeling lost in other environments, which may make him overly abrupt or abrasively honest with his peers. Imagine if you didn't understand all the context and subtext in conversations with your peers. You might feel more left out or feel like an outsider, and that would definitely affect your self-esteem. Most mentors and supervisors think that listening and communication skills are more important than the technological skills that you have to use in the workforce. Emotional intelligence sometimes means knowing when to keep our mouths shut, or how to filter in certain environments, and how to navigate these things in a professional manner, both with our verbal and nonverbal communication. Our other chapters have discussed that only about 7% of what comes out of our mouth is actually remembered, and so much more is understood through our tone, our eye contact, and in our body language. When a person experiences strong emotions, changes occur in our bodies. Certain emotional responses can cause an increased heart rate or can give us a boost of adrenaline. It can also alter your digestive processes. Some of you might feel nervous about speaking in public, which might cause you to feel nauseous or to sweat. There was an interesting study that was done in 2013 by several Finnish researchers, and they asked a sample of 701 Taiwanese and Scandinavian men and women to look at some different emotions. And they flashed words like anger, fear, or disgust across the screen, and they asked the participants in the study where they physiologically experienced the emotion. This could be a tingling sensation, or it could be a neurological stimuli. You could also experience a change in your nervous system, where you have an increased blood flow to certain areas. Basically, what they experienced were emotions in the same way that were consistent with the visual aid on page 229 of your textbook. So you can see here where our body temperature gets heated when we experience certain emotions. So you can see when we experience anger, our fists kind of light up. When we get happy, we get warm all over. When we experience fear or disgust, we feel it in our gut. Not only do we have physiological reactions, but we also have nonverbal changes. If you read the chapter on nonverbal communication, you know that emotions can manifest themselves nonverbally. When we're nervous, we tend to sweat, and when we get flustered, we might blush or our face might get red. This can also change your posture, your speaking tone, and your rate. We might talk faster when we get nervous. If we're angry, sometimes we speak a little bit louder, or we can't even articulate at all what we want to say. This can also change your posture. When you're sad, you tend to slouch over or hang your head. Another example is that when you're in a relationship, sometimes people say that they're the most attractive when they're in a relationship because you tend to smile more, you stand up a little taller, and these aren't conscious decisions. Your emotions and your reactions are subconscious, and they happen almost involuntarily. When we have an emotion, we react to it, sometimes before even thinking about it, and blushing is definitely an involuntary reaction. We never consciously think that we're going to blush. All these things just happen. Even though you can sometimes tell when someone is feeling an emotion non-verbally, the specific emotion might not always be explicitly clear. Just because someone's sweating, that doesn't necessarily mean that this person is nervous. It could just be a hot room. For example, I tend to sweat easily. So when I'm acting or giving a speech or a presentation, I tend to get a little bit sweaty, and there really isn't a whole lot that I can do about it. I know it's just going to happen. Interestingly, sometimes nonverbals can actually cause us to feel a certain way. If we stand up tall, we might actually feel more confident. And if we slump over, we might actually start to feel more depressed. So it's just interesting that we can trick ourselves into feeling a certain way just by changing your posture. Beyond our nonverbal reactions, we also have verbal expressions. I want to take a minute here to focus on clear verbalization. Maybe you know someone who looks clearly upset and you ask them what's wrong and they say, "I'm fine," when you know that's not the case. This is not a healthy way to have an emotional conversation. So it's much more important to clearly verbalize what is wrong and why it's wrong. Our textbook says to express your feelings without ambiguity. Remember, ambiguity is that term that we covered that discusses words that can have multiple meanings and don't really get to the heart of the problem. Ambiguous words like fine or whatever are not helpful in these situations. If you're angry or sad or even just super happy, be clear and tell people why. Say you're angry or you're frustrated because this opens the door to have a clear conversation and not compound any conflicts. Cognitive interpretations share that if we were to measure the physical condition of someone having a strong emotion, we would have a hard time knowing whether that person was trembling in fear or quivering with excitement. When we're very scared or angry or even got really amazing news, your heart rate could be racing, your pulse could be super strong, maybe your respiration has increased, and these are all physical reactions that can be measured in coordination with physical diseases. But we want to look at this strictly as a matter of knowing that our emotions have the exact same effect on us and our bodies. Our textbook also says that athletes that experience pre-competition stress have both positive emotions and negative emotions. Some people feed off of that competitive stress and it motivates them, so it's not always negative. Our personality, our culture, our gender, social conventional roles, and social media all have vast influences on our emotional expression. Our personality, whether or not we're introverted or extroverted, we are predisposed to certain emotions. Extroverted people report positive emotions in everyday life compared to introverts. People who are more focused on analytics might not be as concerned with expressing emotion or picking up on others' emotions. It's very important to consider our own culture and that of other people when we think about how we react to emotions. Our textbook says that researchers can't settle on any few basic emotions because cross-culturally, they're very different, and those could be large cultures and they could also be small cultures. If you think about a funeral, for example, normally you think of it as a very dark, somber occasion. People are usually wearing black and there's not a whole lot of laughing or smiling going on. But in other cultures, when you think about a funeral like Louisiana, they might have a parade and wear bright colors because a funeral from them is more about celebrating a person's life than a very dark and sad event. So cultures do express emotions very differently. Americans are thought of to be a culture of cheerfulness because we're very expressive. We use a lot of positive language and exclamation points. There are different cognitive theories to emotion, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is the foundation upon how appraisals play an important role in giving rise to emotion, the appraisals of a situation that give them meaning in the first place. Here's an example of a school of fish. What do you think the fish in the front, the red fish, is feeling? Americans who are asked these questions were more likely to say that the fish is angry and that he's leaving because he wants to get away from the group. People think the reason for this is because Americans are thought to have more individualistic values. But if you are asked to people from a Chinese background what they think the fish in the front is feeling, they're more likely to say that the fish in the front is feeling sad. He may in fact feel lonely and rejected from the rest of the group. This is thought to be explained by a different set of cultural values. Instead of focusing on more individualistic values like Americans, there's an increasing emphasis instead on collectivistic values of wanting to be a part of a group, having your identity as part of a bigger collective whole. So when you're separated from the group, that's actually something that feels quite negative or aversive. So it's just interesting in the way that cultures appraise different situations. It's really dependent on your own set of cultural values. Another example of individualistic versus collectivistic cultural values that influence the emotions we attribute to different scenarios is this. If you were at a friend's house and you told them to help yourself to anything that's in the fridge, Americans would perceive this as positive because they would feel at home and welcome to take anything they want. But in Japanese cultures, this might be perceived as rude because you aren't helping, which would make them angry. So basically, individualistic cultures are upfront and direct about negative emotions towards others, whereas collectivistic cultures may be less expressive and discourage expression of any negative emotions that might upset relationships among the collective group. Additionally, there are some gender stereotypes out there that women tend to use more ambiguous language and say things like, "I'm fine," when trying to verbalize what's bothering them. Our textbook also shares that men are more likely to experience what scholars call alexithymia. Alexithymia is a reluctance to talk about feelings. This is a stereotype, and it's somewhat true, but I don't find it to be always incredibly true. There are some cultures where there is a very clear male and female gender role stereotype. There's a stereotype out there that men don't cry, and this is something that only women do. But this is something that we're taught socially. And this is something that can be conditioned, right? Weeping is just a natural bodily response. It's a human reaction. But people can be conditioned to control their emotions. So even though men and women feel the same emotions, there are some significant differences in the way they read and express them. This is due in large part to social conventions. We talk a lot about interpersonal communication in terms of social media. Social media has many positive and negative effects on our emotions and our mental health and our culture today. Some of the pros to social media use is that it may be easier for some people to share behind a device. They might be more comfortable sharing there than in person. So maybe you're the kind of person that doesn't like to apologize face to face, but you can apologize over text. It's not ideal, but at least it gets the conversation going. Another pro is that you're able to keep in touch with people who've moved away, right? There's people in our lives, best friends, family members, for whatever reason, they move away. People relocate. That's just part of life. But now, because of things like FaceTime and Snapchat, we can keep in contact with those people, and we have those support systems there when we need them. Some of the cons to social media use include emotional outbursts. This can be bad, especially if you're venting. It's not always proactive and not helpful. It's just ranting, and it can create an unhealthy cycle of responses. For example, if someone vents or rants online about their family drama, their politics, or maybe a bad customer service experience, people can agree, which reinforces the unhealthy emotion, or they disagree, and this creates a back and forth of furthering unhealthy emotions and further ranting. Also, depression and anxiety are rooted in comparison with others, especially on Instagram and Snapchat. These apps have been found to be very detrimental to the mental health of people, especially young adults, which are caused by things like comparing lifestyles, comparing likes and followers and popularity. So the cons of social media use can be negative to our emotions. Emotional labor describes managing our emotions when we need to keep them in check. Sometimes we need to suppress them because it's not the right environment to share exactly how we feel within that moment. Maybe your supervisor tells you something that makes you angry, but you need to accept it in that moment and not go along with it and be a professional in the work environment and maybe save that anger to share with your significant other or family member when you get home. This is emotional labor because sometimes it's hard work. When you're doing emotional labor, you're not just keeping your filter on and keeping the words from coming out of your mouth. It's being emotionally intelligent and keeping your body language in check. You're going to keep your facial expressions and your gestures in check. This is all a part of emotional labor. When we don't have our emotions in check, we can be part of an emotional contagion. This can be both positive and negative. Maybe you know that person that can walk into a room and they can change the entire dynamic by being either really upbeat, really great to be around, and they can lift the mood of everyone in the office space or in the classroom. And then there are those people who are very negative and very sad, and they don't have anything nice to say, and they can bring down the entire mood of the room. These are both examples of emotional contagion. There are many guidelines for containing your emotional expression, and the first part is just to recognize your feelings. Understand that you are often the causation, and it's not always the stimulus around you. Recognize your feelings. A big part of interpersonal communication is understanding yourself. So owning your feelings, not just recognizing your feelings, but being responsible for your own feelings. Choose the best language. When you do need to vent your feelings or share bad news with another person or let someone down, it's important to choose the best language. Be clear. When you verbalize how you're feeling, make sure that you take care to share exactly how you feel as clearly as possible. Try to be articulate and very clear about why. Don't just say that you're bored or you're angry, but try to recognize maybe why you're unmotivated to feel that time or why you feel upset. Share multiple feelings. We're all complex human beings, and we're not just feeling one thing at a time. And maybe because we're feeling multiple things, that may impact how we react. Take the time to evaluate what feelings you have that may be conflicting and share all of them, not just one. Recognize the difference between feeling and acting. This is very important. Just because you have a feeling, it doesn't mean that you need to act on every feeling that you have. Just because someone makes you mad, it doesn't mean you need to tell every person every time you're mad or every time they made you mad. You don't always need to be reactionary. Sometimes it's best just to step back, think it through, give it time, and see how it goes for a few days. Sometimes people say that the key to a good marriage is not to go to bed angry, but I don't think that's always the best advice. Sometimes things get too heated, and you may need to take a moment to step back and calm down and come back to the conversation from a different perspective when cooler heads prevail. And this goes hand in hand with choosing the best time and place to express your feelings, especially if you're angry. Take the time to cool off. Think about if you're asking your supervisor for a raise. You probably want to choose an ideal setting for this, and you don't want to just come out and ask no matter the time and no matter the circumstances. Maybe set a meeting or wait until you've accomplished a goal, and after you've set up that meeting with your supervisor, and then once you've accomplished that goal and done a great job, maybe then would be a better time to ask for a raise. Know that there's always a good time and a place that is appropriate. Remember that competent communication is both effective and appropriate. So make sure that when you're expressing your emotions, you have that piece of appropriateness in there. In order to manage our emotions, we first have to understand that there are two types of emotions which can contribute to our functioning. Facilitative emotions are the kind of emotions that you have that contribute to effective functioning. These are the ones that help motivate us, they help us feel good, they help reinforce positivity in our lives, even the bad ones, as long as we're expressing them positively. Debilitative emotions are the ones that hinder or prevent performance. Positive emotions are joy, love, happiness, which are obviously facilitative emotions, whereas debilitative emotions hold us back. It could be self-doubt, anxiety, depression, anger, maybe fear. These all hold us back, and both facilitative and debilitative emotions can vary based on their intensity. How much we feed into our own emotions can vary this intensity. For example, if I'm angry, and if I spend a lot of time focusing on that anger, it's just going to build and it's going to get worse, rather than trying to assuage it or find a better way to deal with the problem. Again, facilitative emotions would be that motivation to deal with it. Maybe something negative happens, but we're going to find a way to solve the problem and deal with it effectively. That would be a healthy way to deal with a debilitative emotion. Your textbook also gives you the term rumination. These are recurring thoughts that stick around in our heads. These are thoughts that are not demanded by the immediate environment. Sometimes rumination is worrying or how we're reflecting on everything. Rumination can increase feelings of anxiety or depression or sadness, and the more you ruminate, the longer these can last. A big part of debilitative emotions is extended duration. For example, if you feel bad after a breakup or a job loss, those are to be expected, and it's okay to have some grief with these situations. But the longer that you ruminate on the sadness and anxiety, the worse it will become and the harder it will be for you to bounce back and move on to another relationship, or move on to focusing on yourself or finding that new job and being a happy, positive person when you're in those next job interviews. Our textbook talks about how thoughts cause feelings. Minimizing your debilitative feelings is a great way to move forward. We all know that we're going to have those debilitative feelings, but we do want to make them as brief as possible. For example, activating events, like the example in your textbook, include things like bee stings or meeting strangers, and the consequences to those would be things like physical pain or feeling nervous. All of these are completely natural, but you also have to understand the belief that these events hold. Do you believe that you're going to get nervous meeting new strangers? If you believe that you're going to get nervous, you probably will get nervous. Think about how you can be excited to meet new people rather than being afraid of it. You can also look at how you interpret different events. If you're being called names or getting bullied, that would be an activating event. And then you can look at how you would ruminate or think about this. An example of this could be maybe your friend is being mean to you. Is it because of something that they are going through, or is it because of something that you did to upset them? It's important, again, to get clarification before you make assumptions. Your friend may be acting mean because they're sick and maybe they're taking it out on you, and you might have to be the bigger person and be supportive. You can also talk about specific events. An example of this in our textbook is hearing the words "I love you," and your thoughts could be that that is either a genuine statement, or maybe you could think that the other person is just trying to manipulate you. Again, clarification is very important here to decide how you feel. Are you excited because you want this person to love you? Or are you angry because you feel that you're being used? These are definitely going to impact your outcome and your emotions. Another section of your textbook is self-talk. This is the non-vocal monologue, or our inner voice that is our thinking process when we're talking to ourselves or thinking through things. It's very important to monitor your self-talk and to keep it healthy. We don't want that little voice in our head bullying us. We don't want it to diminish us. We want to make sure that we're monitoring our self-talk so that it's a positive and healthy influence in our lives. Our textbook has a long list of fallacies that fall in line with debilitative emotions and how we feel. The first one is the fallacy of perfection. The fallacy of perfection believes that worthwhile communicators should be able to handle any situation with complete confidence and skill. We all know this not to be true. Even the best public speakers in the world and the best interpersonal communicators have issues that they're dealing with. If you ever notice in our pre-recorded lectures, I make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes I say sometimes I have a word that gets a little bit repetitive and it might be bugging you a little bit. But if I'm in class, I don't have those issues so much because I can look at other students and they can give me that nonverbal feedback, whereas right now, I'm just talking to a computer screen and don't have that interaction. I'm actually less comfortable talking to my computer than I am to a room full of people. So the fallacy of perfection would say that because I have a degree in communication studies, that I should be perfect. But that's just not always the case. We all have room to grow all of our lives. Next, we have the fallacy of approval. This means that communicators go to incredible lengths to seek acceptance from others, even at the cost of sacrificing their own happiness. These are people that need to be accepted no matter what by everyone. Maybe you have that poisonous friend in your life, or someone who's friends with you just because they need that constant approval, even though maybe they're not a very good influence. This falls under the fallacy of approval. The fallacy of should is a source of unhappiness because you are unable to distinguish between what is and what should be. Believing in things that are foolish is an example in our textbook. Believing things like money should grow on trees, or we should all be able to fly, or maybe it's your own personality that you're questioning. Perhaps you struggle to be more outgoing, or maybe you struggle to excel in certain subjects that are difficult. All of these things that we think we should be able to do that maybe are not our strengths. If you're too hard on yourself over the shoulds, that's a debilitative emotion. The fallacy of overgeneralization occurs when people believe in a limited amount of evidence. For example, if you completely blank on something and call yourself stupid, or if you judge someone based on one stupid thing they did, maybe they tripped one time and you think they're always a klutz. That's overgeneralization, and it's almost like a version of stereotyping. The fallacy of causation. This fallacy believes that we should not in any way inconvenience others because it will cause undesirable feelings. People who are in the fallacy of causation are people who very rarely ask for help, even though many times they ought to. They may not talk about issues because they want everything in their lives to look perfect. They may have a hard time being honest with people because they don't want to cause hurt feelings. This is very much the fallacy of causation. They really want to make sure that they're people-pleasing in many ways, and they don't want to be a burden in any way or cause someone else's strife. The fallacy of helplessness suggests that forces beyond our control determine our satisfaction in life. Oftentimes, if people believe in this, they believe they have no control. These are people that might have a disability and are unable to overcome it. The error in such statements becomes apparent when you realize that few paths are completely closed. We really can do anything if we put our mind to it. I know it sounds corny, but it's absolutely true. People with the fallacy of helplessness believe that their path is predetermined and there's nothing they can do to control it. They're just going along with the flow. Again, this is usually unhealthy because instead of doing something to change and carving a path they would want to follow and make their dreams come true, they might not be working towards those goals and are just okay with being miserable without fulfilling what they really want to achieve. The fallacy of catastrophic expectations believes that if it's going to happen, it will happen. These people might imagine a worst case scenario. Some of the examples in the textbook include, if you have a party, well, probably no one's going to come because no one likes you. If you apply for a job, you're not going to get hired because you're not good enough. If it's going to rain, the roof is probably going to fall in because that's just what happens, right? Everything is a catastrophe. These are worst case scenario people, and this is the fallacy of catastrophic expectation. It's important to minimize these debilitative emotions. These fallacies are not helpful. They're not helpful mentally for you or anyone around you. So it's important to monitor your emotional reactions. The first step is recognizing when we feel this way. If we're ruminating too much, or if our self-talk is negative, if we're not achieving something and feel like we're grumbling or complaining all the time, then that's usually an indication that we're experiencing a debilitating emotion. So it's very important to take note of how we feel, of our own emotions. If something is causing us to feel a certain way, it's important to figure out what is causing it. Are you unhappy with your job? Maybe you need to find a new one. Is there a person in your life, or are there people in your life that are making you feel miserable? Maybe there's some people that you just don't need to talk to anymore and put some distance between you and that person. Maybe social media makes you feel depressed. Maybe you need to stop following certain things and follow things that make you happy, things that maybe increase your learning or improve your mood. So really monitor your self-talk, because that's just as important as monitoring your verbal and nonverbal reactions. So really try to dispute those irrational beliefs. If you're experiencing these fallacies, overcome them, because again, you really can do anything you want. We all can. We can improve our mental health and alleviate our anxiety and our sadness. So overall, try to maximize those facilitative emotions. Ask yourself, what is it going to take to change to make you feel better? What is it you're going to do to make those changes that you need so that you're not in a place where you're feeling stressed and sad all the time? Please take some time to review the learning objectives for this week. Please make sure to review the vocabulary in this chapter as well as in the previous chapter, chapter 7. Thank you for listening.